Hey, welcome to our first session on Bible tracing. I'm glad you're here, and what I want you to know before we start out is not to be intimidated by this. Take this really slowly. This is why we record them, so you can go back and watch them. Just take your time with this. It's not an exact science, but it will help you to learn better about how to trace an argument in Scripture. The method I'm going to teach you was taught to me by my New Testament professor, Dr. Brian Vickers, who also learned it from New Testament scholar Tom Schreiner. This is a widely employed way of learning how to break down an argument in Scripture. This is used by pastors, again, such as Tom Schreiner and John Piper. All these different guys use this method when breaking down a Scripture and finding out what it is, what the application points are, and exactly what the argument is in the Scripture. So let's begin by looking at just a text of Scripture. Well, we actually won't be looking at a text of Scripture quite yet. We're going to be looking at a statement and looking how to break that down into prepositions. Again, so if we're starting from the beginning, what is a preposition? And a preposition is just an assertion or a statement about something. It's an assertion or statement. Now, a preposition doesn't necessarily have to mean that it's a sentence. It doesn't always mean a sentence. It means just an assertion or a statement. Many sentences have more than one prepositions, obviously. So what we're going to do is look at a quick statement, and we're going to see if we can locate the prepositions within that statement. So if I said to you a paragraph such as this: listen, we are going to learn Bible tracing because tracing is one of the best methods to learn in order to read the Bible carefully. And tracing is important to learn because it teaches us to read arguments by following the logic of the author. Therefore, we should want to learn tracing. So if you pick them out before looking below, you might have come up with something like this. You would have come up with a statement like, listen, the next preposition, we are going to learn Bible tracing. The next, because tracing is one of the best methods to use. Preposition 4, in order to read the Bible carefully. 5, and tracing is important to learn. 6, because it teaches us to read arguments. 7, by following the logic of the author. 8, therefore, we should want to learn tracing. Now notice that prepositions, again, it is not the same thing as a sentence. One sentence can contain several prepositions. A sentence, on the other hand, may contain several prepositions. For instance, in order to read the Bible carefully is not a sentence. It's just a preposition. So we can break that down a little bit further. If we took that whole statement and broke it down into prepositions, we can notice how the flow of the argument is going. So how do we recognize prepositions? We recognize them by the words that they use, connecting words such as and, or but, or therefore, or in order that. We use those different kind of words to trace the argument in Scripture. Now, the reality is we all do this. When we have a conversation with somebody, we interpret this as we're taught. We do this instantaneously as we talk. This is how we know what a person says. This is how we know what a person's point is. That's why we can say, so your point is, you're telling me that, and then we can regurgitate back to them what they're saying. We can do this because we trace arguments in our brain really quickly. The difference is we do this so intuitively that we just naturally do it when we listen, but we don't ever do it when we trace it in our Bibles, or we don't do it inside of written text. What we're going to be doing is showing you how to do this in the Bible, something that we do naturally and intuitively as we speak to one another. So let's break this down into prepositions. That phrase I just read, or that paragraph I just read to you about, listen, we're going to do Bible tracing. Let's break that down into prepositions and see, again, how they relate to one another. So going back to that paragraph that we had earlier, let's see what that looks like. So preposition 1 that says listen, that makes a statement. It serves to get the reader's attention. Preposition 2, we are going to learn tracing. This preposition provides the what that you're expected to listen to. The argument begins here. We are going to learn tracing. Preposition 3, because tracing is one of the best methods to learn. That gives the reader the reason why we're going to learn something. Because, that's a reason statement. It provides what's called the ground of the statement before. Why are we going to learn tracing? Because tracing is one of the best methods to learn. So preposition 4 gives us support. In order that, what are we going to be doing with this? Why are we going to be doing it? It says the purpose of learning training or learning tracing. Preposition 5, and tracing is important to learn, gives another reason for learning tracing. It supports the support. Preposition 6, because it teaches us to read arguments. It gives us the reason or the ground for why tracing is important to learn. Preposition 6 supports preposition 5. So preposition 7, by following the logic of the author, it states the means by which tracing teaches us to read arguments. It supports preposition 6. It teaches us to read arguments. So finally, preposition 8 concludes the argument. It's an inference of the whole entire argument. In other words, all the preceding prepositions support this assertion. Therefore, we should want to learn tracing. The method used in this example is the exact same method employed in tracing a biblical text. So we look at this passage and we go, oh, well, that's separate. That's just a random paragraph. That's not really the case. You can do this with how I'm talking. You can do this with the paragraph we just read. You can also do this with a text of Scripture. This is how we accurately interpret what somebody says. It progresses the logic of an argument in Scripture. This is especially useful in very in-depth books of the Bible, such as Romans or Deuteronomy, Leviticus, Hebrews, Ephesians, Galatians, those type of books that have logical flows and arguments based on logic. You can really take this and make great application points from it. But again, that's just an introduction to prepositions. How do we break it down based on words? We're going to be fleshing this out a little bit further. How do we map an argument out in Scripture? So what I want you to take from this basically is that the beginning of an argument, beginning on breaking a passage down or a Scripture down, is to first break the statement or the paragraph or the verse, whatever it is you're working with, down into prepositions and see the logic of the flow that goes between the words. And we're going to be going through each one of those type of breakdowns, such as series, progressions, grounds, inferences. We're going to be looking at all those different things over the course of the next few videos. So when you go back to a verse of Scripture, and we'll do a couple scriptures where we'll map the entire thing out, you will notice that when you look at Scripture, you'll begin to do this as you read. When you do your devotionals, when you're preparing your lessons, when you're just doing whatever it is, and you're wondering, what's the logic here of the argument that I'm reading in this passage? You'll be able to break this down and make a really good faith attempt at knowing what the logic is and therefore the conclusions and therefore the applications of what you just read. So many times people read a passage of Scripture or try to break down a passage of Scripture without mapping the logic. They'll just pull out a little bit of a text or a little bit of a verse, and they'll end up interpreting it wrong and therefore teaching it wrong. This teaches us to slow down when we read and really listen to the argument and pay attention to what the author's saying. Again, we do this all the time when we speak to another person. We find out the logic, we discover the flow, and we make conclusions and applications based on how they talk and the words that they're using. So what I want us to do is to take this, just a quick look at prepositions, that they're not complete sentences, they're just statements, and they're used by connecting words. And we're going to move into the next session, and we're going to be talking about how to link these prepositions together. So if you need to go back and rewatch this, that's fine. I know it's a lot for this first session. Most of the videos won't be this long. They'll be very, very short. But this introductory and the next video will be kind of lengthy, but the rest of them will go very quickly, and hopefully by the end, you'll be a more astute reader of Scripture and can find out the logic of the argument. See you in the next session.